There is a quote by Frederick Buechner, and it goes, "Here is the world. Beautiful and terrible things will happen. Do not be afraid." Author, blogger, and feminist Glennon Doyle mentions this quote in her newest memoir, Untamed. This newest memoir follows Glennon's journey as she unlearns and untames herself from what she believes society always expected from her. The narrative follows her life as a young girl into womanhood as she tries again and again to fit in with what society expected, to do what was right, what would help her live the life society told her she wanted to live. That is, until she realized that this life wasn't what she wanted at all. So she steps back and she sinks inward and begins to listen to the still small voice inside of her. Throughout this journey, Glennon returns to this Buechner quote whenever she talks about suffering. In her own words, since she allowed herself to begin to feel again, she writes how she has never been fine or okay ever since. She says that she has been overwhelmed with feelings of joy and grief-stricken sadness and the can't get out of bed today level of depression. She writes how affliction and suffering in her life have helped her uncover her suppressed humanity and helped her embrace her empathetic imagination to care about others who are in the midst of horrible and painful things. Glennon writes in her book that we have this vision in our heads about what life is supposed to be like, especially that life is supposed to be easy, like a fairy tale, that if we just do the right things, there will always be sunshine. So we keep trying, we keep avoiding, we keep putting off the rain. We keep numbing our own pain and nullifying the pain of others. But the truth is, life was never designed to be easy. The truth is that in this world, beautiful and terrible things will happen to all of us, no matter how much we try to wish for something else. So Glennon asks, if our vision of life is unattainable, rather than constantly running to live up to it, maybe we should pause and take this unattainable, perfected vision apart, examine it, and design a new one that shares the beautiful and terrible truth about what living is all about. Here is the world. Beautiful and terrible things will happen. I feel like this is what Paul is trying to do in the beginning of his second letter to the church of Corinth. In the beginning of the letter, Paul cuts through the pleasantries, and by verse 4, he drops the mic as he says, God is the one who comforts us in our trouble, so that we can comfort other people who are in every kind of trouble. Now, hearing this clearly, right? There is no if we encounter trouble, God will comfort us. And there's no if we run into a situation where we might need to comfort somebody else. Rather, this is stated as fact. Paul understood that beautiful and terrible things would happen in life. Paul's opening statements about suffering and comfort are ones that set the scene and redefine for readers what it means to be human. Paul instructs that pain and suffering are part of the landscape just like sunshine and happiness. Evil and suffering exist just as abundantly as beauty and joy. Paul's words paint for us this understanding that life isn't about avoiding hard things. Because no matter how fast we run, we can't outrun them. Pain is just as woven into the fabric of our lives, just as love is. And so after framing the letter and setting the scene with this new idea of humanity and life, Paul then offers readers a new way to meet this new reality, this new vision. Here is the world. Beautiful and terrible things will happen. This scripture reminds me of a story, and it's something that happened at the church I worked at back in Michigan. Every Wednesday morning, the first thing we did was have staff worship. And it was not unusual for early people like my husband Eric and I to be some of the first people in the chapel. And usually the only other person who beat us there was our friend and colleague Adrian. So every Wednesday morning, we would walk in, gather our things, and wave as we would make our way to the chairs. And after we would be seated and get settled, the same conversation happened every week. Either Eric or I would turn to Adrian, and we would say, "Hey, good morning, Adrian. How are you?" Adrian would pause, and he would give us this knowing look. And then in his thick Romanian accent, he would say, "I'm good," as he would tilt his hand from side to side. We'd sit there for a moment, and then Adrian would continue as he would say, when I came to America, I learned that when people ask, how are you doing? They don't really want to know. They just want to hear that you're good. However, in my country, people genuinely wanted to hear what was happening in your life. The good, the bad, the boring, all of it. And each time he would say this, I would turn around and say, "But Adrian, I'm your friend. I really do want to know how you're doing and what's been going on with you." He would look at me and smile and repeat, "I'm good." Friends, this is the world. Beautiful and terrible things will happen. Do not be afraid. As I listened to my friend tell this experience each and every Wednesday, it made me sad, so brokenheartedly sad, that he felt he could not share his full self and all of the beautiful, terrible things that he was experiencing with the people around him here. And it made me wonder. I wonder if this is why Paul wrote the opening to this letter in this way. Maybe it's because, much like us, it was scary and hard to acknowledge the suffering in our own lives and in the world. Again, here is the world. Beautiful and terrible things will happen. Don't be afraid. This is where I want us to turn to verse 7 in our text today. While verse 4 paints the scene for us, verse 7 is the plot twist. This is the moment that the story turns. As Paul builds up to verse 7, he prepares us for what he's about to say by using this collective pronoun of we. There is no I, there is no them, there is us, there is you all, and there is we. In this passage, there is a connection, a community, a bond that has formed between God, Paul, Timothy, the church of Corinth, and that same connection is even extended to us as readers today. Paul says that we, that means all of us, will experience suffering, and all of us will experience comfort. In verse 7, Paul says that he and Timothy's hope is secure, because clearly Paul and Timothy know that all of you, all of the church of Corinth, are partners in suffering. And so all of you, all of us, are partners in comfort. It's as if he is saying, my beloved companion Timothy and I can do these hard things because we know we do them together with you. Paul is reminding us that God calls us together not to breeze past our own suffering or the suffering of others, but to journey through this together. With God's help, of course. Friends, here is the world. Beautiful and terrible things will happen. Do not be afraid. It's interesting that Paul's words also remind me of the story of Jesus and his beloved friend Lazarus. The story is found in the Gospel of John, and it takes place where Jesus arrives at Mary and Martha and Lazarus' house for a visit, when he learns that his friend Lazarus has died. Even when Jesus knew the ending of the story, and even though Jesus knew that there could be life restored, Jesus doesn't immediately run to Lazarus' resting place and raise him from the dead. Rather, the first thing Jesus does is Jesus weeps. Jesus grieves for his friend. Jesus cries for the pain of Mary and Martha. Jesus weeps with them and with us. Here is the world. Beautiful and terrible things will happen. Do not be afraid. Friends, Paul is pointing us back to Jesus with these words. And Paul is reminding us of the humanity that Jesus showed. Jesus, the man who weeps for his friends, who sits at bedsides and at tables with those who are hurting, the one who listens and holds out a glass of life-giving water. Jesus partners with us in our suffering and comfort. And Jesus invites us to also be partners in suffering and comfort with each other. Our own experiences with pain and suffering are not immunizations to keep us safe from ever feeling pain again. Rather, our own experiences are a brilliant part of our humanity, and what allows us to truly see the pain of those around us who are suffering, even when we can't understand it ourselves. Our own encounters of pain create tender places in our hearts that can give us the courage to weep with each other, to walk with each other, to listen to each other. Being partners in suffering and comfort is a reminder our lives are not platitudes or rote questions. Our experiences and our emotions are so much bigger than I'm fine, or I'm okay, or I'm hanging in there. The truth of human experience is so much more dynamic and complex than the unattainable vision of a good life is easy. Through these first few verses of this letter, Paul is framing for us a world where beautiful and terrible things happen. And even though they are scary and hard and big, and even when we're afraid, we can and we are called to do these hard things. To meet people in suffering with tenderness and love. Together. With God's help all along the way. Friends, here is the world. Beautiful and terrible things will happen. Do not be afraid. Thanks be to God.